I'm 83 years old, and I need to tell you something. I have never said this plainly before, not to my children, not to anyone who knew me back then. 15 years ago, after Vincent died, I came within 3 weeks of marrying another man. 3 weeks. The invitations had gone out. My daughter Emma had helped me pick a dress. My son David had reserved a room at a restaurant for the reception dinner. Everything was in place, and I walked away from all of it. People said I was running from grief, said I was letting fear make my choices, said I was going to die alone and that I'd regret it. But here's what nobody knew. Here's what nobody tells women about remarrying after 60. There are 5 brutal, unglamorous, completely unavoidable realities that make remarrying one of the most dangerous decisions a woman in this stage of life can make. Not just financially, not just emotionally, in ways that can cost you everything you spent your whole life building and everyone you love along with it. I'm going to tell you all 5, and I'm saving the one that finally made me call it off for the very end, because that one still sits with me. I need you to stay with me through all 5, because if you're being pressured to remarry, or if you're considering it because the loneliness is eating you alive, and I know exactly what that feels like, you need to hear this before you sign something you cannot undo. Vincent died on a Wednesday, peaceful, in his sleep, the way we'd always hoped it would be for him. And for the first few weeks I was surrounded, my 5 children rotating in and out, neighbors bringing food, the phone ringing constantly. But when it all stopped, when everyone went back to their lives, the silence in this house was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I was 70 years old, and I had never, not once, spent more than 2 nights alone in my life. I went from my parents' home to Vincent's, and that was that. The quiet after he was gone was physical. It pressed against me. Some mornings I'd sit at the kitchen table and feel nothing moving anywhere in the world. That's when the suggestions started. My daughter Linda said, "Mom, you shouldn't be alone. It's not good for you." My son Thomas said, "Dad would want you to be happy." My sister called and said I was too young to give up on companionship. And slowly, without realizing it was happening, I started to believe them, started to think that living alone meant something was wrong with me, that I'd failed somehow. There was a man, I'll call him Gerald, a widower, 76 years old. We met at a church social organized for seniors in the neighborhood. Steady man, calm. He reminded me a little of Vincent, predictable in the way that felt safe after grief. We had coffee, then dinners, then he called every day. And 6 months after Vincent passed, Gerald proposed, not with romance. Practically, he said, "We're both alone. It makes sense to combine our lives. Take care of each other." I said yes, because everyone told me I should, because the loneliness was crushing me, because I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Pay attention to this detail because it's going to matter later. I said yes without knowing a single thing about Gerald's finances, not one thing. And that brings me to the first reason, the one that went cold in my stomach the moment I truly understood it: financial annihilation. 2 weeks after Gerald proposed, my friend Helen asked me to coffee, said she needed to talk to me about something important, and she told me about her friend Carol, who had remarried at 68. Her new husband seemed stable, had a pension, owned his home, seemed responsible. But 8 months into the marriage, Carol started noticing things. Collection notices in the mail, phone calls from creditors at odd hours. It came out that he carried $30,000 in credit card debt, unpaid medical bills, and a loan he'd co-signed for his daughter that had never been repaid. And the moment they married, Carol became legally responsible. Not morally, legally. Her retirement savings, built over 4 decades, started draining. Her credit destroyed. The house she'd owned free and clear. She had to take out a reverse mortgage just to stay above water. Within 3 years, everything was gone. Helen told me Carol sat at her kitchen table and said, "I thought love would protect me. I didn't know a marriage license would make his problems mine." I went cold sitting across from Helen because I didn't know anything real about Gerald's finances. He seemed comfortable, but seemed and is are 2 completely different things. So I started asking him, carefully I thought, about his savings, his debts, his children's situations. He got defensive immediately, said, "Why does it matter? What's mine is yours. What's yours is mine." And look, that phrase, that's what scared me. That's exactly what scared me. I talked to a financial advisor that same week. She was direct with me, the way I wish someone had been years earlier. "Everything you own becomes jointly accessible," she said. "His debts become yours. His medical costs come out of your savings. If the marriage ends, he is entitled to half of everything you brought in. And if he dies first and has children, they can contest the will and claim rights to assets you believed were yours." She showed me cases. Women in their 70s working part-time jobs because their second husband's debt destroyed their retirement. Women who lost homes to medical expenses. Women whose own children were left with nothing because the law protects spouses over children. Every time. I went home that night and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I was about to risk. The house, the savings, the money I'd always planned to leave my children. All of it would become vulnerable the moment I signed that license. But honestly, that alone wasn't enough to make me call off the wedding. Not yet. The second reason came from somewhere I wasn't expecting. It came from watching myself. In the months I'd been spending time with Gerald, I'd started changing. Small things at first, rearranging my schedule to fit his, canceling plans with friends, adjusting what I cooked because he didn't like certain foods. And one morning I woke up early and sat in my kitchen and realized something had been disappearing without me noticing. After Vincent died, after the worst of the grief passed, I had started for the very first time living in a way that was entirely mine. I ate breakfast at 9 in the morning or noon or not at all. I stayed up reading until 1 a.m. I rearranged the sitting room furniture 3 times in 6 months just because I wanted to. I watched programs Vincent would have hated. Small freedoms, barely worth naming, but they were mine. And I had already started giving them up, without Gerald ever asking me to, just automatically, making myself smaller to fit into his life, because that's what decades of marriage teach you to do. You accommodate, you adjust, you find the shape of the space available, and you fit yourself into it. And what I didn't understand back then, well, I was starting to understand it. If I married Gerald, I would spend whatever years I had left doing that again. Not because he was a bad man, because marriage does that. It had done it to me for 46 years, and it had done it beautifully, and I had loved Vincent completely. But I had never once, not once, just been Laura, not half of something, just myself. My friend Dorothy had remarried 3 years before this. I went to see her one afternoon and she looked exhausted, not sick, just worn through. I asked how married life was. She smiled, but her eyes didn't move with it. "It's fine. He's a good man." Then she said, "I just miss having my own space, my own schedule. He gets upset if I'm gone too long, says I'm choosing my friends over him, my daughter over him." She was 74 years old, and she was right back where she'd been at 40, managing someone else's feelings, justifying her choices, apologizing for having a life outside of him. She said quietly, "Sometimes I miss living alone, and then I feel guilty for missing it because he's a good man, and I'm supposed to be grateful someone wants me." That night I sat at this very table and asked myself a question I hadn't asked before. Who am I when I'm not defined by someone else? And I was only just starting to find out. That was the second reason. And this is where the story gets heavy, because the third reason came from my daughter Linda, and it nearly broke something between us. She called and asked to meet for lunch, just the two of us. She was quiet when we sat down, picking at her food, not quite meeting my eyes. Finally, she said, "Mom, I need to ask you something honestly." She asked what would happen to the house when I married Gerald, whether her father's savings, the money Vincent and I had built over 46 years, would still go to my children when I was gone. I didn't have a good answer. I'd assume my will would still stand. I hadn't thought past it. I told her she was being selfish, that she should want me to be happy. She started crying. She said, "It's not about the money, Mom. It's about watching you give everything away to someone who's known you for 6 months while we've known you our entire lives." We didn't speak for 4 days after that lunch, but I talked to an estate attorney, and he told me what the law actually says. Your spouse becomes your legal next of kin, not your children. If you die, he has spousal rights that can supersede your will. Your children could spend years in court paying legal fees, fighting for what you always intended them to have. He told me about a woman who remarried at 70, had 3 children from her first marriage. Her new husband had his own children. When she died, her husband contested the will. The case took 3 years. Her children spent over $50,000 in legal fees. In the end, the husband received 60% of the estate. Those children, the attorney told me, will never forgive him. They lost their mother, their inheritance, and their peace of mind. I thought about my 5 children, my grandchildren, the life Vincent and I had built together, piece by piece, year by year. I didn't want that to be what I left behind. Not a courtroom, not a fight between strangers. That was the third reason. But wait, it gets worse. The fourth reason came from watching my friend Ruth, and it horrified me. Ruth had remarried at 69. Her new husband, Frank, seemed healthy when they married, active, cheerful, a good man by any measure. 2 years in, Frank was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. By 72, Ruth was helping him dress in the mornings, managing a complex medication schedule, driving him to specialist appointments, helping him shower. I went to visit her one afternoon when Frank was resting. She made tea and her hands were shaking slightly, not from illness, from exhaustion. She said, "I'm so tired, Laura. I'm so tired I can't think clearly anymore. And I feel guilty for being tired because he can't help being sick. But I'm 73. I don't have this energy. And I'm scared. What if I get sick? Who takes care of me then?" She started crying. She said, "I thought I was getting a companion, someone to share life with. I didn't know I was signing up to be a full-time caregiver. And I can't leave because I'm his wife, because I promised." I need you to understand something before I continue. Statistically, it is almost always the woman who ends up doing the caregiving. Men with health problems have wives to look after them. Women with health problems end up in facilities. We give care. We rarely receive it. I had already cared for Vincent through his final 2 years, watched him fade slowly, managed his medications, sat with him through nights when neither of us slept. It nearly broke me, and I loved him more than I have words for. I could not do that again, not for a man I had known for 7 months. And if that made me selfish, then I accepted that entirely. That was the fourth reason. The caregiving trap that can consume whatever years you have left. You're not ready for what comes next. Because the fifth reason, the one that finally made me call it off, was the quietest one and the most devastating. I sat down one evening, 3 weeks before the wedding, and I asked myself one question. Why am I doing this? And the answer wasn't love. It wasn't passion. It wasn't even real companionship. The answer was because everyone told me I should. Because living alone felt like admitting defeat. Because somewhere deep inside me, after 70 years of being taught that a woman without a man beside her is somehow incomplete, I had started to believe it. I was about to get married not out of desire, but out of obligation, out of a fear that being alone meant being less than, and that, honestly, was the one I couldn't live with. I called Gerald, told him I couldn't go through with it, that I needed to be alone, that I needed to finish becoming whoever I was going to be without Vincent before I could be anyone else's anything. He was angry, said I'd wasted his time, said I'd die alone and regret every day of it. Maybe, but I'd rather die alone and whole than spend what's left of my life slowly disappearing into someone else's shape. I want to tell you something. One of my children, and I'll let you guess which one, called me last week and said people are watching these videos and talking about our family. They said, "Mom, this is embarrassing. You're making us look bad." I told them, good. Maybe someone needed to hear it, because I read every comment you leave me, every single one, and I know how many of you are being pressured right now. By children who think you shouldn't be alone, by well-meaning friends, by that quiet voice inside you that was taught for decades that independence is just another word for giving up. It isn't. It is the opposite of that. If what I've told you today reached something in you, if you recognized yourself in any part of this, leave a like. It tells me to keep going. Subscribe if you want to keep sitting here with me, because every week I come to this table and I tell you the truth without softening it. And if you've been through something like this, if someone is pressuring you, if you've already walked away from something like I did, or if you wish you had, tell me in the comments. I'm here. I read every word. You are not incomplete because you are alone. You are not failing because you are choosing yourself. You have spent enough years fitting into the shape of someone else's life. These years, whatever is left, those belong to you. Guard them like you mean it.